"Don't embarrass me," my husband whispered, his voice barely cutting through the polished conversations beneath the crystal chandeliers of the White House East Wing. We had just cleared security, surrounded by uniformed Marines standing at attention and guests in military dress. Ethan adjusted his medals, casting me a quick, cold glance without smiling. "Just stay close and smile when you are supposed to, because tonight is extremely important for my career." I stared back in complete silence, a quiet response he mistakenly took for complete obedience. At the check-in desk, a young hostess greeted us with a polite smile, asking for our invitations. Ethan handed over his envelope with absolute confidence, standing tall as she scanned his official code. A clean beep echoed, and she welcomed him as Colonel Harper. He gave a knowing smirk, turning to me as if expecting me to struggle for mine. Instead of pulling out the invitation he had watched arrive in our mailbox, I reached into my bag and pulled out a completely different envelope bearing a shimmering presidential seal. Ethan raised his eyebrows, demanding to know what I was holding, but I ignored him and handed it to the hostess. The scanner beeped and then abruptly halted, causing her smile to vanish as she double-checked the screen. Without saying another word, she motioned toward a decorated 4-star Admiral standing a few feet away. She quietly announced that I had arrived, and the Admiral immediately turned around, stepping toward us with direct purpose while nearby chatter suddenly faded into complete silence. The Admiral extended his hand directly to me, addressing me warmly as Colonel Rachel Harper and expressing how much they had been looking forward to my arrival. Surrounding guests paused their conversations, and my husband blinked in utter disbelief as he watched the interaction unfold. I shook the Admiral's hand, telling him it was an absolute honor to meet him in person. He replied that the honor was entirely theirs, adding that the president would be thrilled to hear I had finally walked through the doors. Beside me, Ethan turned completely pale, his mind racing with frantic questions he could not bring himself to ask. He could not comprehend why the president was eager to see his wife, but the answer traced back almost a year earlier. Back then, I still foolishly believed that humility could preserve a fragile marriage. I spent nearly a decade serving as an Army logistics officer, a demanding role that most people carelessly reduced to basic paperwork, inventory tracking, and endless administrative spreadsheets. Even Ethan used to mockingly call me the Queen of Inventory, a title I accepted with a quiet smile because correcting him would mean breaching operational security. My oath required total silence, and while high-ranking combat commanders received public applause, people like me worked behind closed doors to manage fuel, emergency transit, and complex global supply lines. If we did our jobs correctly, nobody noticed, which suited me fine because my father had taught me that true officers chase responsibility rather than cheap applause. When Ethan and I first met at Fort Liberty, he was a kind, selfless officer who admired character over status. However, rapid military promotions gradually transformed him into a man obsessed with titles, appearances, and constant recognition. At social gatherings, whenever someone asked about my military career, Ethan would quickly interrupt with a chuckle, claiming I just kept things organized. His family treated my profession as a simple afterthought, continuously praising his achievements while completely ignoring my dedication. Over time, Ethan stopped asking about my daily operations altogether, assuming my long hours were spent staring at simple spreadsheets. He never imagined that my classified assignments directly impacted whether thousands of deployed service members received critical support overseas. I carried the heavy burden of managing life-or-death missions while enduring the profound isolation of being invisible to my own husband. Our marriage drifted apart not from a lack of affection, but because Ethan had slowly fallen deeply in love with social status. When he reached the rank of lieutenant colonel, I celebrated his achievement as our shared victory, but the promotion only fueled his growing arrogance. He began introducing himself by rank, making every conversation about his authority while dismissing my work as minor administrative support. During a dinner outside Arlington, a retired officer asked about my duties, and Ethan quickly made a condescending joke. When I subtly clarified my role, Ethan grew defensive on the drive home, accusing me of trying to outshine him. To keep the peace, I adopted a habit of staying quiet during his insecure outbursts, even as my professional duties expanded into highly critical joint initiatives. I was chosen for an elite task force requiring top-tier security clearances and intense hours inside secure, isolated facilities. When Ethan asked about my work, I told him I could not discuss it, prompting him to roll his eyes and make jokes about the military trusting me with larger spreadsheets during family dinners. Despite the constant disrespect, I held on to my self-respect, remembering my father's advice never to measure my worth by the loudest voice in the room. Eventually, I was summoned to the Pentagon to lead a massive multi-agency operation involving complex emergency corridors, medical supplies, and critical overseas logistics. I worked exhausting 18-hour days to coordinate the mission, while Ethan remained completely oblivious, continuing to diminish my career in front of his peers at every opportunity. Everything shifted late that autumn when 2 separate official envelopes arrived from Washington with heavy gold seals. Ethan opened his invitation to a White House reception with overwhelming excitement, immediately calling his family to brag about his achievement. He never bothered to look closely at my envelope, which contained different protocols, a different entry time, and a completely different seating assignment. I quietly tucked my document away into a desk drawer, letting him believe the evening was entirely about him. Now, standing inside the Grand East Room of the White House, the reality of the situation finally began to crash down on my husband. The Admiral led me toward the front rows reserved for distinguished guests, where senior leaders and generals stood up to greet me with immense respect. Across the crowded room, Ethan was directed to a standard seating area 8 rows back, looking on in total shock as his commanding general asked if he knew me. After the official ceremony concluded, guests gathered in the reception hall to offer their heartfelt congratulations, leaving Ethan standing completely alone near a window. He slowly approached me with a shattered demeanor, his usual arrogance entirely gone as he stammered that he had no idea what my job truly entailed. I looked at him calmly, explaining that he had embarrassed himself long before tonight by choosing to look at titles instead of recognizing the person standing right beside him. His commanding officer walked over, quietly expressing deep disappointment that Ethan had failed to recognize the remarkable leader he lived with every single day. Left in uncomfortable silence, Ethan choked up and asked why I had never told him about my true impact, to which I replied that my clearance prevented it, but his arrogance would have prevented him from listening anyway. In that quiet moment, he was forced to confront the painful reality of his vanity, realizing that chasing status had ultimately cost him the respect of his wife. Walking out into the crisp evening air, I felt a profound sense of clarity and peace about my future. Real strength does not come from proving your worth to someone who refuses to see it, but from recognizing your own value and moving forward with dignity. Ethan followed me outside to offer a tearful apology, admitting he had spent years chasing rank while ignoring the person who truly mattered, but the damage was already done. I simply looked at him, took a deep breath, and quietly walked toward my own future, leaving his shadow behind for good.